Um, Thank you everybody for coming. If you all wouldn't mind putting on your cameras to talk to Samuel Shem, Dr. Bergman, we're gonna say Samuel Shem. What do you want people to address you as Dr. Bergman or Dr. Shem?
Neither.
Okay.
I want to be called Shem.
Okay.
And
So
I can explain why later, but yeah, just call me Shem.
perfect. We're all here today because we read hopefully both books, House of God and Man's Fourth Best Hospital, which is set in the more modern times. House of God was set before, and
Right.
this is just a great opportunity for us to ask questions and talk to you about the book, your life, and everything else. So I encourage everybody to participate, jump in, ask questions, and yeah, I'll be moderator, and if anyone wants to start, please go ahead.
Just tell me one thing so I know kind of who you are. So this is a class in what?
So, most of us are T1 medical students
Right.
so first year medical students at Tulane. Many of these students are in my various groups that I'm in. So we have Patterson Literary Society. So that's the book club basically.
Okay. Yeah.
And I've got my master's students. We do a master's degree in bioethics, medical humanities. So several of those classmates are here. I've got my fellow friends, and then I also invited a few other classmates from other years to come and participate. So majority, and the bioethics interest group. So the majority of us are people associated kind of with me, but there's other people here too. So all fans, all cool.
You go ahead. I interrupted you. You were going to introduce me or something, I think.
Yes. So I'm gonna give the little blurb that I had out. So as we all know, Shem, sorry, one second. My computer is freaking out. Sorry, so I talked about the book. Shem is a professor of medicine at NYU, and he's written several books. We're here for Man's Fourth Best Hospital and for the House of God. And on Friday, he's also going to put on another talk about putting the human back in medicine. And I wanted to open up the floor for questions, because this was supposed to be more of a kind of informal book discussion sort of situation. I do have a bio for you, but I need a minute. My computer is not working. I'm so sorry. So if we want to start with a question, I can follow up with that in just a second, if that's okay.
Okay, sure.
I'd like to start with just a very general question, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So Shem, I was wondering, just based on your books and everything that I can kind of get from your story and how those books went, I was just wondering two things: what inspires you most within medicine, and just in general, what inspires you most about life, and sort of how you might take that question is something interesting to me.
Yeah, well, they're linked. They're linked. Well, that's a very good question. The second part, what's most inspiring in life, right? Well, you know as much as I do about that in a way. I think what's most inspiring in life, and the thing that's hardest to really learn as you grow, is how to create really good connections with other people. And what's a good connection? A good connection is a mutual connection. If it's not mutual, it ain't that good. I mean, if you think of some of the relationships you've had, or even if you've been in marriages, you get to a point where you really have to get to some kind of mutual vision of the world. Not that you don't have differences, but it's not about I and you, it's about a we. And that's the most important thing. I think, to learn about, especially in, I would say that America is the most individualistic country probably in the world. The whole idea of the Declaration of Independence, we have these rights. And I grew up, I went to college in the, from 62 to 66. And, I went to Harvard, and it really is the epitome at that, especially at that time, although I think it's still quite true, of being a great self. This thing, I mean, achieving things, getting marked, you're getting grades, all that stuff. And I came from a small town called Hudson, New York, and I was scared stiff going there. And my father informed me when I was going off to school, he said, well, the only reason you got into Harvard was because of geographical distribution. That wasn't very affirming, And I was an athlete, so and I was scared stiff going there. Actually, this sort of launches into the writing stuff. And I was very scared when I got there. I had never heard of Aristotle or anything like that. I mean, it was really pretty spare. But I kind of wanted to be a writer. I was a great reader, and I took solace in writing from a pretty miserable family situation. And so they distributed a book of all the 1,000 men. They were just boys, men in those years, no women, on what you want to be, And out of the 1,000 men, I would say maybe 60, 70 wanted to be writers. I was one of them. So everybody had to take this writing course in the first year, right? And I was assigned a paper, and I wrote it on something, handed it in. I got it back, and there wasn't a mark on it. I thought, oh, well, maybe it's perfect. Maybe she wants, except down at the bottom, little tiny red letters was "See me." Oh, she wants to congratulate me. I had a big ego in those days, much bigger than it is now, if you can believe that. So I went to see her, and she has this paper, and these are the first words to come out of this great institution's mouth. And she said, quote, "This paper is too terrible to mark. It's below F." And I mean, it was like I got, the first feedback from Harvard. I said, oh shit, below F, that's pretty low, And so she didn't give me any advice about what to do. But anyway, I kept on putting in the papers, and below F. Finally, I sort of wrote something like a comic book in very simple sentences. She said, "Great improvement, D-." Well, but she had a profound effect on me. I said, okay, I can be a lot of things, like a doctor. I wanted to be a doctor in life, but I can't be a writer. That's the one thing I can't be. Okay, so I never wrote another word at Harvard. And that first year, there was another guy in that seminar group who was a kind of a blonde Adonis from Florida. He got there, he was really stupid, but he got there, he was a great swimmer, right? And I was on the golf team with him. And he was in the class. And so I'm bitching about, maybe I got up to C- by that point, just out of, she had to, if you go, you get a C-. And I was bitching about it. And he said, well, I'm getting a straight A. I said, what? You? I mean, the guy couldn't even talk, he never read a book, he's a swimmer, blonde. And he said, yeah. And I said, well, why? He said, well, I've been sleeping with her all year. and that's maybe what she meant. See me, see all of me, and you'll get an A or something like that. I mean, these are true. I'm not a sexist by any means. I'm woke, I think, very, very loudly woke and stuff like that. But anyway, but it's the best thing that could have happened. This is one of these things where you never know if it's the worst thing that's going to happen to you or the best. There are a lot of times it looks bad, but you realize if that didn't happen, the other good thing couldn't happen, right? I don't know if you've experienced that ever. So I didn't write anything until I got to Oxford on the roads. And I thought, well, she can't catch me now. She's 3,000 miles away. And I just started to write. And here's the interesting part. The people who were getting A's, not whatever, Ray, not Ray, the guy she was sleeping, but the people who wanted to be English majors and wanted to be writers, they started too soon. They start, the other, 50 people who wanted to be writers, when I came back to the 20th reunion, I was the only one to write in fiction, not academic, but I was the only one because they had all taken the courses that, that were taught by poets and novelists, some famous, and they all learned how to kind of do what they were told to do. And they didn't have anything of their own, to own. And so I was the only one who became it. So, you never know, if something is really going to turn out better or something's going to turn out worse. So you just have to learn about, and in terms of medicine, I'll just go on. I'm not going to give a lecture or anything here, but in terms of medicine, I got lucky again, got very lucky. I had wanted to go to medical school after Harvard, and then I got this scholarship. And I was writing, but, just never trying to get anything published. And then after 3 years, this was the Vietnam War. This was 68, this would be 68, 69. And I got a notice from my draft board saying, because I had to leave Oxford. It was running out, and they said, report to your, Secret Service, whatever it's called, the service thing. And so at that point, so I had a choice. And this was the thing that shaped my whole life. This is another thing. I never would have become a good writer if this hadn't happened, because I said, well, look, I had a choice between Vietnam or Harvard Med. And I thought rather than getting killed or killing people, I would try to save them. So I'd already gotten accepted to Harvard Med before I left. So I went to Harvard Med. And if I hadn't gone to Harvard Med, I wouldn't have had anything to write about. The thing that really activated whatever I really could become was all of a sudden going into the internship in medicine at the Beth Israel Hospital. And then the reason that I became a writer is because it was so bad. What, as you read, almost everything in the House of God was true. Almost everything I write is based on something true. But it was filled with horror and brutality and injustice. And what happens to me is if I see something like real injustice, I say, hey, wait a second. Somebody's got to write about this or take action in other ways, but for me, write about this. And I guess it's me. And so that's been the absolutely main factor in my writing. Almost every book that I've written, plays, etc., has been something like, that, hey, wait a second moment. It's like, you probably have had this at one time or another. You're walking down the street, somebody's asking for $1, right? You look and you say, no. And you walk past. I usually do, I did, I don't as much now. And I say, well, he wasn't, hey, wait a second, he wasn't that bad. Maybe he really needs it. Why did I do that? And when enough of those, hey, wait a second moments pile up, then I start to write. And I write, as I call it, in resistance. The things I write, most of certainly the nonfiction writers, but even most medical novelists really try to just describe the situation, right? But what not a choice, what I have to do is, it's not enough to just describe, but I have to write it so that it has a sense of how it can get better. And lo and behold, I never thought it, but the house of God really, this isn't my opinion, it's sort of what people have told me. And so it did help to get better call schedules on the books, right? And I got lucky on that. I think the biggest thing in terms of medicine and of life, like as we're talking, you know, it's very important to be aware of injustice and how much it means to you and what you want to do about it, little ones or big ones, you know, and then be, you know, keep your eyes open and don't judge what an opportunity can be, because it can be the worst thing or it can be the best thing. You don't know. You don't know. All right, I'm done. Sorry, I get too wordy. I'm a writer. What do you want? You know.
Shem, I had a quick question for you.
Sure.
You hear me?
I hear you. Why don't
Yeah,
you
I think
say, what's your name? Blair?
Oh, my name is Blair. My name is Blair.
Okay, Blair.
Hey, nice to meet you. I think do you remember doing the Z-Dog podcast last spring? Dr. Zubin.
How could I forget it? Z-Dog. Do you guys know Z-Dog? Z-Dog is a wonder. He's amazing. It's the first time I met him. You know, he's just dynamite. Yeah, I remember. I love that guy. I'm going to do another one soon.
Oh, good. Yeah, he's like kind of he's a humanist, right?
He's terrific.
Yeah.
He's on the side of what's unjust here and how can I help to make it better. So we you know, he's a generation behind, but you know, I said to him after that book, I got to know him and all of that stuff. I said, you know, if I were your age, I'd be doing what you're doing right now. You know, I mean, he's the next generation. I'm sorry. Yeah, go ahead. So
well, anyway, my question is, like, so I thought about, you know, how difficult your residency is, and like, there's an education requirement where you have to see enough patients, right, to become proficient. And then there's like the difficulty aspect of it in terms of, you know, maybe the inhumanity. And at some point those overlap, right? Like, it has to be sufficiently difficult so that you can treat patients the right way. And I'm just wondering, like, how far does the inhumanity of it exceed the educational aspect? And then, like, if you were to just like if the business model were to allow just more physicians to spread out the work, could you solve it that way? Or would it get to the point where the education starts to get diluted and people have to spend like 6 years in residency and then they have to start practicing later? Or so anyway, I know there's like a relationship between those two variables. I don't know where the sweet spot is, but that's kind of what I'm interested in.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that I'll answer it by thinking, well, what was so horrible about the house of God? Because I've done a lot of thinking about that over the years. And what I've realized is, to stay human in medicine, the danger is isolation, and the cure is good connection. The danger of isolation and the healing power of good connection. So what we had in the house of God, I think most of you have read this now, right? It's a big, as usual, traditionally a big hierarchical structure. The power comes down from the top, everybody else gets squeezed, and we were at the bottom, basically getting squeezed that first year. And what happened was, in the book, each of us got isolated in 3 ways. We got isolated from each other, right? As the thing goes along, people stop talking to each other, Potts jumps off the building, eat my dust, goes crazy. You know, we got isolated from each other, right? And the second thing is, each of us got isolated from our authentic experience of the system itself, meaning you start to think, I'm crazy for thinking this is crazy, and you don't want to buy into that. And then the third, you're not going to have a problem with. It's different now, thank God. That is, we got totally isolated from our loved ones, our girlfriends, or there are only men in the group, girlfriends or wives. There was no time. We never, ever saw them, basically. I think we had a week's vacation. That was it. So I'd answer that question. It's not a matter of how many hours. I mean, they're better because they're better hours. But there are problems too, because you don't have continuity of continuity of care. I think the issue, and this is the one thing, this is the one takeaway, the issue is you have to stay in connection. It's really dangerous in these big hierarchies, doesn't matter what they are, if you start to isolate yourself. That's, I mean, suicide, and there have been, more and more and more for various reasons right now, is a disease of isolation. It's a disease of isolation. And so I think, if you can do that, if you have someone that you're with, that you can have a good mutual relationship as you're going through this, even one person, better a group, then you can work real hard. You can work real hard. I mean, having continuity of care, where you admit a patient, you stay all through the night to see whatever's going on, and then you leave the next day. We had to, we were there the whole next day too, and sometimes one night off or two. That's, I think, what's really important. And you have to, the other thing is, if you see something that's not right, you have to connect with each other and say, hey, we are not going to do this, and you try to negotiate what you can do. What about, nobody's really talking about the books, about what's in the books. And that would be nice, because I could get some feedback, especially Man's Fourth, if some of you read it, because that's more recent. Is that okay?
Yes,
I want to hear
please.
some of you. I want to hear some of you talk.
Yes.
I'm gonna call on Ella.
Okay. Hi,
Hi.
thank you for joining us. It's sort of book adjacent, but I was kind of wondering what prompted you to write a play, and what differences you saw in kind of writing and executing a novel versus writing and executing a performed work. I just thought that was a really interesting part of your career. I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah. Well, I love theater, and I really when I started writing, when I was away from that woman in Oxford, I started writing plays and some short stories and stuff. And they were very young things. I never tried to get any of those things published that I did in those 3 years, but I always had the bug. And I kept at it once I got back to the United States. And in fact, I had a couple of I had a couple of plays that were about one-act plays that were about English people that were done off Broadway early on, and that sort of, I really wanted to be a playwright, and I sort of kept at it, and the really the best, one of the best and the worst, but the best experiences I've ever had was the play my wife and I wrote called Bill W. and Dr. Bob. And that came about because we wanted to work together. She's like Barry, actually. She was a psychologist at that time. And so she said, why don't we work together? Why don't we do a couple of things? So one from your area, this is a good idea, actually, if you want to try to do it. Let's write something for my expertise and something from your expertise. And what her expertise was there that we did together was a new, well, actually, we wrote a book together on it called "We Have to Talk: Healing Dialogues Between Women and Men." Okay, and she had created with a bunch of women at Wellesley College here, a new psychology, a new psychology. That's all it is to say. And this is all in that book that I just mentioned. For women, the usual, well, for men, the usual theory of healthy psychological growth and is in the self. He's or she is a strong person. It was a self centered psychology, and that didn't feel right to the women. This was in the 80s. They said, well, what about valuing not the self, but the way we connect, how we take care of people, how we nurture, how we, all of that stuff. And so they created, this is wonderful, changed my life because doing this, what they did was figure out that the basic idea was that the measure of a person's psychiatric health and growth is the quality of their relationships. It's the relational, it's about the we, right? And so she wrote with her other colleagues there at Wellesley, the relational model, which was very, very popular, and this was in the years of the women's movement, the first big women's movement. And she and I then went together and did male-female dialogues all over the world using this, and it's very important it's very useful in medicine. I'll give you an example. To use the we, to put it simply, right? Not I, you, right? I'll give you an example. Say the old-time surgeons, right, would be the patriarchal surgeons would say to their patient, well, I did the test and I'm going to operate on you. That's an IU, right? And it's hierarchical. Now we come to a long time since that. I've done the test and you can get a second opinion if you want. That's still IU. IU is adversarial. It's lawyers. It's all the people you didn't want to be. You didn't want to be lawyers. You wanted to be doctors, right? Because they just fight all the time. They're adversarial. So what would happen if the surgeon said, well, we've done the tests. Let's talk about what we're going to do. We've done the test. Let us think about what we're going to do. There are three we's. If you put the we out there, what does the patient that you're seeing come back with? It's like you're saying to them that there's a relationship here, and they will return by saying, well, I think we should, blah, blah, blah. And the reason that surgeons, they've just done studies about this, the reason that surgeons get sued more often than others, the person says, I didn't have a relationship with him. Now, if you think of what, you're not there yet, but when you're seeing a new patient come in, what I like to say is connection comes first, right? If you connect with that patient, you will hear everything. If you don't connect with that patient, you're not going to hear anything. Connection comes first. Now, this is, I think, in Man's Fourth, I wrote these down as things, as laws. Nobody ever gets relationships right all the time, right? Just think of your own. We're messed up, right? Just think about it, right? Nobody gets it right. But which are the relationships that work? It's when, for instance, you can say, they use the we here and there, you can say, when things are going wrong, you can say, you can even say, well, we're in a disconnect. And that is a connecting device, right? So you're throwing, actions come in words, and well, you get it. I won't go on. But there's a funny story about, well, I won't even go into that. Let me just finish with the play. So we did that with her. We did 20,000 men and women all over the world and wrote this book. It's really about how to make good relationships, and it's still there. You can buy it. But we were also going to do something for my interest, which was plays at that time, right? And novels with plays. And so she came to me with this book, this story of the two men that founded Alcoholics Anonymous. And I read this story. I couldn't believe this story. I don't know how many of you know that story, but it is absolutely astonishing. I won't go into it. You can get a copy of both the script if you wanted, or there's a DVD of the off-Broadway production, which is really good. It's a really good DVD you can get from various places. And what they discovered was also in line with what we had discovered in the other side of the thing we were doing, which is that these two men, and the other thing is, one of the two men was a doctor. One was a stockbroker from New York, Bill Wilson, and one was a doctor from Akron. They're both going to die, terrible alcoholics. He was a surgeon, doctor. He used to go into, Dr. Bob used to go into operations drunk and all that stuff. But they were going to die. They happened by the craziest route to get together, never met before. Bob had been really drunk the night before. He didn't want anything to do with this guy. But anyway, they met. And they were only going to talk for 15 minutes. They talked for 6 hours. And out of that came the beginning of AA. And what happened was that Bill, as Bill says, the only thing that can keep a drunk sober is telling his story to another drunk, which is a little weird. It may not help the other drunk. Saying that. And so they started right then, they realized right then, putting this together, that alcoholism was a disease with physical, psychological, and spiritual, not religious, spiritual parts. And you had to deal with all three of them together to stay sober. And that's the birth of the holistic movement in America in 1935. And I've grown to think that it had to be a doctor that Bill met. He'd done everything else. He was going to die, and he just happened, the craziest way, to do this, to meet this guy. And then, that meeting is repeated, 100,000 times a day, every day, all across the country. So I guess what I'm saying is, if I was lucky to be with Janet at a very crucial time in our lives, and to stretch to this whole new relational model as a man. I was the only man with 25 women out at Wellesley College, and then we almost killed each other with trying to write together. That was really hard, but it's something you might try.
Reminds me of the Harvard Grant study.
What's that?
I said that reminds me of the Harvard Grant study.
Yes, that's right. By
It's like
George.
the exact same parameters almost. Yeah.
Yeah. What was his name? He was a friend of mine. I can't remember. George. What was it? Anyway, it doesn't matter. So did any of you read Man's Fourth Best Hospital? Because that's something that is much more current. And I could talk a little. I got I got really lucky with that book too. I'll give you a preface if you're ever going to read it. You know, I was just happily writing, and you know, a bunch of other books. And then one day out of the blue, I got a call from NYU medical school. He said, how'd you like to be a professor at NYU? And I said, why? What's that about? You know, didn't know. And they said, we want you to teach. And I said, what do you want me to teach? And they said, dummy, we want you to teach the house of God. Now, in our humanities program, you know, teach a seminar to medical students, doctors, etc. And you have to understand that Harvard, my previous alma mater, or my alma mater, hated me for the house of God and really did some shitty stuff, you know. And here's somebody saying, you know, we want you to teach it. That was 7 years ago. Now that was good. That was great. And I've had a wonderful time. I think it's the best place I've been, you know. Let's see, I forgot exactly where I was going with that. You know, oh, I know. So for the first time in years, I was back on the wards. I hadn't been in a hospital, you know, for years, literally. And so I'm curious. So I'm going on wards and stuff. And the first day that I went on wards, I saw something that said, hey, wait a second, you know. And I saw the miracles we can do, right? But what I also saw, as Roy Bash says at the beginning of Man's Fourth Best Hospital, I'm called to write this because of it was a time when medicine could go two ways, either toward more humanistic care or toward money and screens, which means money and money. So with the house of God, I took on the injustice of brutal training, but I had to, with Man's Fourth, describe and deal with the injustice of the whole system, and just about killed me. You know, I'm too old for that kind of stuff. But so that's where that just to frame that. Anybody read it?
Yeah, I actually had a couple questions. So it was published in 2019, right? When did the events of the book take place? Was that very recently, or was that like, because you're talking about iPhones in it, was it more like 2010, 2011? What time range? I know that it sounds silly, but I'm trying to, knowing how Epic and stuff works today, I'm wondering how many of that clicking stuff is still relevant, you know? Sorry, please go ahead.
Oh, well, yeah, as you know, you pick up, I don't say what year it's in for various reasons, but the clicking stuff, I'm a little puzzled. The clicking stuff is worse than ever now in the billing. I mean, you know, there's a war being, as I say in the book, there's a war being fought in every hospital on one side of the screen, being fought across the screen. And it's all about money. And so the doctors are forced to bill the most. And the insurance is trying to pay the least. And doctors are going crazy. I don't know if you've had much experience with that. Is this new? That can't be new. We're in a bad place right now in medicine, really. No, you know, I mean,
to hop on that, that's kind of my question. So I haven't read Man's Fourth. I haven't even read House of God yet. I haven't started medical school yet. So I'm starting it in August.
oh,
And so I have a reading list for the summer, includes House of God, Man's Fourth, and Sapiens. And recently I'm in, I'm going to be doing the MDMS with bioethics, and I'm in the class with Nikki and Ella.
yeah.
And recently, I've been thinking a lot just about, for example, drug pricing, and I'm going to be writing, a paper on that, and really going into a lot of how there just isn't enough regulations about all this stuff, and that's how this corporate greed And as Ella said last week, like administrative bloating, you know, has really just corrupted so much of how we provide care, the ways that we do it. How do you maintain optimism if you do? I mean, the past couple of weeks I've had just a lot of fatalist ideas in my head. And as someone that's really excited to do the good work, as I put it, I'm curious to know, what do you think, how do I combat this? How do I make, you know, some of these things better in the future? And what kinds of things should I be sort of looking for and investing my time in?
Well, that's the most important question of the day, because the more deeply I got into what the fat man stands up in Man's Fourth Best Hospital at the beginning of in the middle of the book and says, and he gives a lecture on all this called "The Six Rackets of American Healthcare: Follow the Money." And I had to dissect what is going on. It took a long time to quite understand it. But the question you're asking is what keeps us going? And for better or worse, I'm still going. You know, I've been down in my life, sometimes really down in my life. But what I grew up with in the, during the Vietnam and civil rights movements was that if we see an injustice and if we only stick together, that's the big thing, connection again. If we only stick together, we have tremendous power. Witness, in my time, we put the civil rights laws on the books and we ended the Vietnam War. It was because of our resistance, and it was resistance of people your age, mainly, and, for instance, I don't know if you ever heard of, in 1970, the massacre of 4 Kent State students by the wasn't the cops, it was, I forget who it was exactly, the troopers. And everybody on not every, but almost every university went on strike. If you can imagine, there were fires in the streets, it was horrible, horrible stuff. And it was my freshman year at med school, and we were about to start the kidney block. So we decided, as we did in those days, we commandeered the amphitheater where we had lectures, and we had people get up there and talk, and people would get up there and talk and say, if we go out on strike, we'll never learn the kidney. And I and many others said, the hell with the kidney, we're out of here. And that's the point. I never did learn the kidney, actually. And in the House of God, the villain is a kidney guy, right? But you never can tell what's going to help to change things, except you do know what's not going to change things, and that is if you don't find like-minded others and do what we can. And I think your generation, our daughter's probably about your age, your generation is very, very much tuned into these things, like with climate and pollution and, you name it. So I've seen things change when people get active. Here's the one thing that for you as doctors, as going to be doctors, I like to say, people say, what do you do? What do you do? How do we get anything to be better? And I say, well, when not COVID, but when people used to go to the theater, if somebody falls down on the stage, right, and the cry goes out, to the audience, you don't ever hear, is there an insurance executive in the house? You know, we do the works. We are the workers. Without us, you have no medical care. We are the most powerful, we are the most powerful force in medicine, but we don't stick together to get what we need. And right now it's very hard, this burnout stuff. It's very, very hard, suicides and divorces. And so you have to, we have to get together and decide what we want and ally with nurses. Nurses almost never lose a strike. Do you know that? They almost never lose because they've got a really, so doctors, nurses, and patients have to get active against the insurance companies. The one worst thing. I mean, you know, pharma is no secret, no great thing either. You know, but you got to regulate this. Well, I'll cut to the chase. Have do any of you know about the Veterans Administration hospitals and their system, healthcare system? Yeah. I was with a bunch of students several years ago, and I asked, you know, because they hate they hate the current system, Epic. You know, everybody hates it. It's horrible, horrible. And some medical students were saying to me, "Oh my God, that Epic," and they're computer literate like you are, but it's awful. It's awful. It wasn't made for doctors. And I said, "Well, do you know a better computer system?" And they thought for a minute. They said, "Yes, the VA." And I said, "Well, why the VA?" And they said, "Well, because they thought about it for a while, and they said, there's no billing." Right? The real crux of it is that if you have an appendectomy at the VA, say, that appendectomy is the same price all through the country, more or less. There are regional differences. Nobody is niggling each other and fighting each other for more money or less money. And so I'm spoiling it for you. The fat man, his remedy for how to get out of this mess is he says we got to squeeze the money out of the machines, right? They shouldn't be billing machines. We should have a national system that sets the prices and all of that. And you know what? I am very hopeful now. I really am. I think that Biden is taking steps that are laying the ground for getting after insurance companies and getting after big pharma. I've been on Medicare for years. It's a great system. You don't have to obliterate your private insurance. A lot of people on Medicare also have a supplemental insurance, right? You probably known that from your parents or something. I never see a bill. It's terrific, you know. And that's a solution. I mean, it doesn't take genius. I have a lot of hope that we doctors and scientists and all that stuff. Look what the scientists have done for COVID. Would you ever have thought a vaccine could be in a year rather than 4 years? So anyway, you got to regulate the insurance companies out of the business and have, you know, blah blah blah. It's simple. We have, you know, we're down at number, you know, I don't know, we're above Togo or something in medical care. And for people of color and the poor, the COVID has just shown how awful this is, and awful for doctors. It's awful for doctors, for patients and nurses, and only better for the insurance industry has been deregulated. That's, you know, over the past 15 years. That's the problem. I'm talking too much. I told you, you guys interrupt me or something. Benjamin, what are you thinking?
Hi, Shem. Thanks for being with us tonight. I was thinking about what your thoughts are on the ability to understand stories and also tell stories, how that benefits a physician today.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite get that.
Oh, sure. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how being able to understand stories and be able to tell stories benefits physicians today.
How can you tell stories as a physician today?
Yeah, how that skill, the ability to tell
How do you,
stories benefits a physician.
how do you get the skill?
Yeah.
Well, that's a very good question. I don't know. Well, I got quite depressed after I think my second novel. I don't know, because I had a job. I was a doctor, a practicing doctor, and I wasn't getting the kick out of writing that I was getting before. This was even after The House of God, you know. And I remember I just sort of, my wife said, geez, you just sat around in the bath, you know, went around in the bathtub for a year, because I was trying to figure out why write. And finally, at the end, it came, well, because I can't not. You know, it's what I like doing. I really like doing. I'll tell you one other thing that expanded what I learned as a person and as a writer and as a doctor. This was really a remarkable thing. I was a purist when The House of God came out, and I did no appearances, none. I thought, you know, really good writers don't do appearances. And because it was before the internet and I took a pen name, nobody could get to me except through my publisher. And for 2 years, I got a lot of invitations. No, nothing. I got, you know, I'm writing, I'm doing stuff. And then one day I got a letter from my publisher through the mail. And I opened it and it said, I'm on call all night in a VA hospital in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And if it weren't for your book, The House of God, I'd kill myself. And he wasn't joking. And I said, I got this, you know, I got this, I got this like a punch in the gut, you know. And I said to myself, people want to hear what you have to say. And so from that day on, literally, I almost never refuse an invitation. And that's led to, you know, all over the world, basically. You know, all the continents except the one that's iced over, Iceland. You know, I don't know. You just, I think if you want, I mean, you can write crap and make some money. You write in TV or video or whatever, make some money. But I don't know. Writing is hard. You know, if you're a writer, I think, you know, you try it. If you like the process, it means you probably have something that will last. I don't understand these quote writers who just bang their heads against the wall for a page a day, you know. Let's see that.
There's a question in the chat. I'm gonna read it out loud to you. The person, their mic is not working. They said, when I read The House of God as a first-year student, I was honestly kind of horrified in the difference between what I was reading and my idealistic view of the medical system. But as a third-year student and now as an intern, I feel very heard. Things are obviously much better now than the past, but the brokenness of the healthcare system and the core value of sacrificing yourself for the field continues. And reading someone else expose it was very cathartic. Every day I feel like medical care has lost its humanity because we spend so much time on the screens fighting with the EMRs and trying to get insurance companies to allow us to treat our patients. I think our goal is to make hospitals less money focused, but it feels like what goes in the opposite direction, where everyone's goal is to take as much out of the system for themselves as possible. Do you really think this is possible to turn this around?
Yeah, that's the big question, and I address it everywhere I go. I think, put it this way, it's like during the civil rights laws and stuff like that in Vietnam. It is, I don't want to be too discouraging to you. This is an optimistic statement coming up, you know. This is really bad. This is really bad for doctors, for patients, for nurses, for other people who work in it. It's only better for the insurance industry and the pharma industry. But it being so bad is hopeful. This is what hope looks like. I don't think it can get terribly much worse. I really think this is what hope looks like, because there are a lot of people, as this person says, who, you know, this is not right. And I think it's hopeful actually right now. There are tons of people who are working on this. You know, it's not like people aren't paying attention. We are. I think it's going to get better for you. But you know, if you know, you have to stick together. You have to decide what you want and try to stick together. You know.
Hey, Shem, if I know we're getting a little low on time, but you still haven't mentioned why you go by Shem. Does that relate to the story you just mentioned?
Not really. The reason I took Shem, which was the stupidest thing, I thought it was the stupidest thing I ever did, but now it's getting a little better after all these years. I was just starting my psychiatric practice, and one of these, let me put it in a kind way, asshole psychiatrists, a Freudian psychiatrist who I knew, said, well, you better take a pen name because they're going to be able to see what their therapist is doing, you know, and it has sex in it and all this stuff. And so that's the reason I took it. Now, of course, everybody found out anyway, all my patients, you can't hide that kind of thing. And they'd come in, oh, you did this and it's got sex in it and blah, 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 blah. And that would last about 5 minutes. They say, oh, you should have seen what my mother did to me, you know, or so. They didn't care about me. They cared about you. But then I was stuck with it. And Shem in Hebrew means name. So at that time, I was more Jewish than Buddhist. Now I'm more Buddhist than Jewish. And so that, you know, and nobody has the name. And so that's why I did it. I like being called, but a more recent shift to being called Shem, which I like. It came from when I've been to Australia a few times for the books, and I was in Brisbane, Australia, and I talked at a big conference, and I had a radio interview the next morning, and some people were coming out of the auditorium, and they were shouting about something. It turned out that's when Bob Dylan, won the Nobel Prize for Literature. Now you have to understand, for a person like me, Dylan is it. I mean, he was our guy going through all that. He's a genius, and still here, even older than me. And so the next day, I had tears in my eyes when I heard that night. And then the next morning, I was on the show, the radio show, and I'm waiting to go on with this guy and he's talking all about Dylan and how much he likes him and all that stuff. So then I go on and I say, look, you know, I love Bob Dylan. I actually have a favorite song called Up to Me. You can look it up. It's not one of the big ones. It's a wonderful song. And I said, can I just recite the lyrics? So I did recite the lyrics. So we had this thing. And then he knew who I was in the medical community kind of, and all of that. And he said, well, Shem, you're the Dylan of medicine, which I puffed right up my, you know, really, you know, wow. Yeah. And so I went on a long walk around the bay there. And by the time I came back, I'm saying, I'm not fooling around with this. I just want to be called Shem. So tribute to Dylan, and also it's kind of cool and it's short, right? If I'm autographing books on. It's easier. So, Nikki, if you're the only one who's read Man's Fourth, is that true?
I mean, I don't think so. I thought that other people had read it too. I think they all just got distracted because there's lots of things you've accomplished in your life, and they wanted to ask you about
Oh
that.
yeah, no, that's right. Well, just give me a little review of give me a little review of Man's Fourth.
Okay, so I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed it actually more than House of God. And I enjoyed it more because it was more relatable to what we were going through. Now, I was only trained with, things like Epic and things that click. And I never really thought about the fact that, they are always asking, about extra diagnoses and stuff. But I've never had that diagnostic power before. My position, I used to work as a psych tech for several years. And I would write, blurbs about how the patient was doing that day. So all I ever focused on was what the patient was doing in my conversation with the patient. Were they acting, safe? Were they not? So I got to do a lot of one-on-one FaceTime. And I've never been really in that position where it's just the computer. And I thought that was really eye-opening. And, I was right there with you and the fat man. I just wanted to, get rid of it and figure out something different. Though I also get on a high horse that I want to get rid of our insurance companies as it is and have a universal healthcare system, as anyone who talks to me for more than 5 minutes would know.
Yeah.
So it was cool to learn about the VA. And also you were talking about the reservation healthcare stuff. And apparently there's already systems right in place, is what you're basically saying, that we could use and capitalize on. For whatever reason, we're using things that we can't communicate with other hospitals and share data. Therefore, it keeps things isolated. We don't work together, and that's your whole point.
That's right.
Right? We have to work together. Us being in isolation leads to, you talked about it leading in isolation, leading to alcoholism. You talked about it leading to suicide, and it's leading to us continuing the train of this bloated insurance situation that we have in the United States that isolates the vulnerable. And, as somebody who wants to actually do good for her patients, this upsets me and I want to do something about it.
Yeah.
So that's where I stand.
Yeah, well, I'm glad, because I want this to be in a different way. Well, it is doing the same thing the House of God is doing, because this is our plight, and I try to make clear how this can get better. As you know, I don't think it's a pessimistic book in the end. In fact, if you want a picture of what medicine used to be, did I mention this to you, The Spirit of the Place, that novel of mine? That's a book that some of you might want to read, because it really is about how medicine could be practiced in this little town that I grew up in Hudson, New York. It's about the narrator going back to join his, being forced to go back in some ways through his family to join this old roly-poly doctor, who's an old-fashioned. And it really would give you a sense now in your generation, because you don't see these people anymore, of what medicine used to be, really what it used to be. And it's about, good connections. It's really about being in a town and having good connections. And it's rare, but I would recommend that if you want to read anything else that's going on. It's in print.
I had a quick question. I know we're over, but I just want to admit that I didn't read the book, but I'm really interested in reading the book. And I was just wondering I think it's really great you're open to feedback and are really interested to hear what we think. Are you available by email or written letters?
Yeah, why don't you, I mean, take down my email.
That'd be great.
I'm making myself very I guess because I'm older now, I'm making myself very much available to people who maybe I can help. So yeah, it's just, Nikki has it, but it's SSHEM, right? Shem, right?
Mhm.
At Comcast.net. And I'd be glad to hear from you. And it's really kind of at this point thrilling. I mean, when was it? Couple of days ago, I was, as I say, I was a Rhodes Scholar, and they have now these Zooms for connecting all of the Rhodes Scholars together. When somebody, all different Rhodes Scholars who give kind of lectures and stuff. So I did that last Friday, and just seeing how much wonderful energy there is out your generation. I see it in our generation still, and in our daughter's generation as well. The other thing that I'm sort of halfway through the new novel, which is kind of in the same, Roy Bash is in it and stuff, but it's during the COVID now. So that's an example. If you were me, what would you do to write next? After Man's Fourth Best Hospital, and what's the biggest issue? The biggest issue is this last year in COVID. I actually caught it, early. I was one of the most early ones. A year from last March, at an appearance for Man's Fourth Best Hospital in Montefiore Hospital, which is in the middle of the Bronx in New York. Just an incredibly dangerous thing. We didn't know. All we did was not shake hands. And actually, one of the guys I had, a famous surgeon I'd gone out to dinner with the night before, died of it like 5 days later. So. But the COVID has taught us a lot of stuff. It's taught us about the miracle, as I said. I think get a vaccine in less than a year. My God, I mean, the miracles that can be done. But it also has done two other things that I think are going to get really looked at. One is the suffering of the poor and the people of color. It's just, there's nothing like it. And also how the insurance companies, I don't know if you know this, because the insurance companies have made a ton of money during the COVID, because they stopped having to pay for elective surgeries, right? But everybody still has to pay their premiums. So they're collecting all this money. And the other thing is, I don't know, I'd be interested if any of you have experienced this. There's another really bad thing that's happening all over America. There's a big article in the Wall Street Journal this morning, I think, about how, get this, about how private, you know what private equity is? Private equity is a financial kind of thing that you don't have to report a lot of stuff, but you invest. Private equity for years now, maybe 5 years, has been buying up small hospitals all across the country. Have you heard about this? Anybody?
Yes, I have heard about this.
Yeah, it's incredible. They're buying hospitals all over the country, and they're doing what you'd think they do if they just want to make money. Doctors and nurses and all, they all come last. Patients all come last. And you know what the first thing they do is? They did it in my little town that I write about. So it's very apropos. The first thing they do when they buy a hospital or a hospital chain or buy all these things up, there's an article in the Wall Street Journal, I say you can look about this. The first thing they cut is obstetrics. They cut out obstetrics. So you've got these little towns like the town I grew up in, Hudson, New York. Women have to drive 40 minutes to deliver a baby. if they want to, if they have to go to the hospital, they want to go to the hospital. Imagine all over the country.
This could be contributing to the maternal mortality rates of our country, right?
Well,
I'd love to see some data about
right. I think you will find that. That's right. Yeah, but that's, you know, that's just the worst example, because the hospital I'm writing about in Hudson, New York, where I grew up, has been a stable, you know, since after the Civil War. It's been a stable, good hospital, and it wasn't that it was going broke. It's just they wanted it. And so that's another, I'm trying to deal with that in this new book, because as I say, hey, wait a second. Anybody got a really good question? And then we'll stop. You guys are probably going to do some heavy studying, or I don't know what you're going to do.
Also, sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to comment. I read Man's Fourth also, and I've read House of God, and I read Mount Misery, and enjoyed both of those. And so it was really fun to get back into the world, your world. And I think it was, having just read it recently in the post-COVID world that we're in, it was kind of eerily relevant. Some of the laws, for example, like I don't remember the number, one of the last laws was stick together always, and not like fighting that isolation that we feel. And as medical students, we've been, especially early on in medical school, we were all stuck at home.
Yes, right.
And so we were on the computer. Most of us, our medical school experience has been just at home on the computer. And a lot of us have felt more isolated than ever in our lives. And so it's something, it was amazingly relevant to read some of those issues in your book that you didn't even know about COVID when you wrote it. And so it's exciting that you're actually addressing it now in a new book. And I'm looking forward to that too.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because this isolation this is going to have profound effects. Well, it's already had profound effects. So I appreciate that. Yeah. As you could tell, I took on really the hardest thing I could take on with Man's Fourth, because I never went through that, you know. And to bring, it's about the Man's Fourth used to be Man's First Hospital. This is just for people who haven't read it. And the WASPs who own this hospital, it used to be Man's First, but then it fell all the way to Man's Fourth, and they panicked, you know, and they said, oh, we got to get some help. They needed prestige and money. So the fat man had gotten famous in Silicon Valley, finding a pill for Gomers to retain their memory or something like that. And so they bring him in. This is all imagined, right? This is all imagined, because I think, what can I do? What kind of book can I write here? And what he came to do, he said, I want to start a public clinic leaning up to one of your big towers. And I'm going to pick people and bring them in. And most of them are a lot of them are House of God interns. But this time he has an equal number of women that he breaks in, because I got crucified because there weren't women in the House of God that were respectable or something. You know, that's a whole other story, as you know. And I'm going to make this clinic called the Fat Man Clinic, and it's a public clinic. And what he's going to do is how to put the human back into medicine. Put the human back into medicine. So imagine yourself, if you were a writer, that's my job. That was my job for this book. And so it was a great exploration about how to do that and what to do. And as I got into it more and more, I realized that's why I'm sounding so maybe autocratic or definite about what's wrong. Because, I mean, you know, talk to a doctor and this is what you'll hear now. So, but Nathan, don't lose faith. Don't lose faith. I mean, there have been some good things about Zoom. You know, I taught my whole seminar through Zoom. It wasn't nearly as good because you have to be around the table in person. But this is going to go. and you've got a lot of time ahead of you. And connection comes first. The most important thing that all of you can do is to be in a good relationship. That's it, you know, however that has to happen. Because isolation, as I said, is really dangerous. And you know, just think how good it'll be to actually, when you get into a room with a patient again, stuff like that, or even a classroom. When will you be going back to in-person learning, do you think?
We kind of have a hybrid situation going on right now. And we've slowly but surely been having moments to get to know one another. We're still not quite back, but it's getting there. It's getting there.
Yeah. Well, you have a funny kind of, it'll be funny to see the third dimension, won't it? These two-dimensional relationships. All right. Any burning question, or should we call it a day?
We'll call it a day. Thank you so much for coming. Shem is going to be back on Friday to talk about putting the human back in medicine again, but less informal, more structured, that one.
Right.
This was more just to explore the book and writing. And we really are grateful for you coming and for hearing our questions and talking things out with us.
Well, thank you. And I mean it. Write me if you want. Yeah.
I certainly will. As someone that really sees herself as a writer / doctor, I really appreciate that. And I will be reaching out to you at some point.
All right, good. All right. Thank you. Thank you so much. I don't know. You don't have to go to the lecture, you know, the end of the week, because I'll probably repeat some of this. So. All right. Thanks so much.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.